Today on the Mr. Maple podcast, Tim and Matt count down the top 50 green Japanese maples, numbers 25 through 1.
Hey guys, welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. I'm Matt. I'm here with my brother Tim. We've got part 2 to the top 50 green Japanese maples. Today we're going to be doing the top 25.
So if you haven't checked out our podcast from last week, go check out number 50 through 26. It's green Japanese maples. They're some of the most amazing Japanese maples in the landscape and garden. In traditional Japanese gardening, they're one of the most commonly used Japanese maples because they give you that essence of nature, that amazing summery feel out there in the garden. And then when fall does happen, you do get that changing of the seasons. And green is just one of the most underappreciated colors, but there's so many amazing green Japanese maples out there. I joked at the end and said it's not easy being green.
Go ahead and get out of the way for this.
Go ahead and get out of the way right now because it's not easy being green. It's the most underappreciated color of a Japanese maple in the United States in gardening today, but it is one of the most amazing Japanese maples you can have.
We used to do a lot of tailgate markets. It would crack me up. A guy come up to us one time and he said, I've already got a red one and a green one. Well, so we're talking about 50 different green unique traits for Japanese maples. These are all 50 going to be very different. We're getting to that top 25 today. And these are some of our favorite Japanese maples that are green for the sake of being green. So these trees we picked them because of their greenness. So there's some of these will have exceptional fall colors and different things, but we kind of rated them based on what we like as a green Japanese maple.
So guys, coming at 25, we've got Acer palmatum Shigure bato. And this is a very unique Japanese maple that's in between a lace leaf and a matsumuri. It can have an upright spreading shape. Oddly enough, Brian Rule, who was a customer of ours, had this tree in his Oklahoma garden. And then he moved to Western North Carolina and started a new Japanese maple garden. And he was going to try all new Japanese maples, but he had to have a Shigure bato again because it was that amazing to him.
Yeah, it's super unique, and I think it is kind of right in that in-between world of a lace leaf and an upright, matsumuri style. It's interesting. Yeah, I would put it more in that matsumuri category for sure, but it definitely shares a lot of characteristics that we like with lace leaves. It kind of merges those two worlds really well. Typically yellows to oranges in the fall, and just a nice compact habit. Very old Japanese maple cultivar as well.
Yeah, it's one you don't see that often in the nursery trade, but it's a classic. And some of those classics are goodies. And Shigure bato is definitely one of those classic Japanese maples that more people should be growing. It has that uniquely shaped leaf, but it can often have a more upright habit. So it gives you the appearance of another upright lace leaf Japanese maple. So it gives a fun texture in the garden, but it's just a good Japanese maple overall with some good green color.
All right, coming in here at number 24, we've got Acer palmatum Kiyohime. Now, this is one of the classic dwarf Japanese maples, and though in the early spring it's very much noted for having that bright purple border, those summer shades of green can be quite exceptional.
And this is a uniquely shaped Japanese maple. It has more of that toadstool-like appearance where it gets short and wide. And this can be used in so many different ways, but that green color with that short, wide habit is a fun tree to use out in the landscape and garden. It's also a great tree that's commonly used for bonsai because of its unique habit, but it gives you that good summery feel with the changing of the seasons, which is traditional Japanese gardening. An amazing tree with that really, really interesting purple border in the spring. I know when Matt and I would go out to garden shows when we were a much smaller nursery, and we loved doing it, people would run after the Kiyohimes because that spring interest and how this tree looks so good in a container.
Yeah, great for the small area container. Always very popular for bonsai as well. Very small foliage. So it's one of the smallest leaf greens, and it really gives you some interesting texture, whether it's in that summer pattern or in its spring or fall colors. Typically oranges to reds in the fall, but really when it hits that summer, it's July right now when we're recording this, and that's kind of what it's got us in that mode of thinking about green Japanese maples. This one has a very summery feel to it, and it is very much heat tolerant in that zones 5 through 9. This one's going to go in full sun up to zone 8 typically and be exceptionally durable.
Yeah, it is a very hardy tree. I know many people in the Deep South love it because of its hardiness and its heat tolerance, which makes it a great tree for many gardeners. Coming at number 23, we've got a really cool Acer sieboldianum. We've got talking about a weeping sieboldianum. We're talking about Seki no kegon.
Yeah, now this is a exceptionally cold-tolerant Japanese maple that can go typically even into zone 4. So Seki no kegon is incredibly unique in that it's a sieboldianum, but it also has a pendulous nature to it. So this is a weeping form with that big sieboldianum-style leaf.
Yeah, it's very unique in the fact that it's one of the first more weeping styles of that full moon style foliage. Now it has a nice rich green color to it as well. With that pendulous shape, it's very unique having that larger rounded foliage. But it just is such a unique tree out there in the garden, and that green color is exceptional. But the fall color on this can range from yellows infused with oranges and reds. I mean, it's a really, really amazing tree that stands out from many of the other Japanese maples.
All right, coming in here at number 22, we've got Acer palmatum Ryusen. Now, Ryusen is, one of the most heat-tolerant Japanese maples, and it wears green really well. This is going to be a pendulous tree that gets about as big as you stake it and really brings some of those great vibes of green. I would say it's probably one of the closest things to a weeping form of your standard Acer palmatum subspecies palmatum. I think it's got a little better traits than that, but because of that, it also shares a lot of that durability with Acer palmatum subspecies palmatum. It is exceptional in full sun and high heat exposures up to zone 8. Really can even push a little bit into zone 9 in that high heat exposure. You want to give it typically a little late day shade in some of your highest full sun zone 9s, but this one really can push areas. I was blown away by seeing it growing in full sun in Dallas and just not skipping a beat.
So hardy is definitely a good descriptor for Ryusen, but also malleable. This plant can be grown in so many different ways, from being a ground cover, not being staked up, just allowed to crawl across the ground, to being staked straight up and allowed to grow down like a fountain, to being grown in a hanging basket, to being grown coming out the bottom of a hanging basket as a topsy-turvy. We've even seen this thing grown and trained over trellises. I mean, the extreme weeping habit of Ryusen is wild, but it is so malleable and easy to shape and turn into what you want it to be, that this is such a fun Japanese maple to grow in the garden and add that lively feel with that green color.
Super easy to do, and like Tim said, there's so many different ways to grow it. Now, Ryusen is going to come out a bright chartreuse green. Sometimes even in pictures, it almost look yellow. There are yellow forms of Ryusen. It can be incredibly chartreuse, going to more of that Kelly classic green midsummer, and then typically oranges to reds in the fall. Exceptionally durable, though. That's one of the things I love about this one. And there's so many different ways to play with this one. If you don't stake it, it's going to just be more of a small ground cover. The way I typically grow this one is staking it to about 5 to 6 feet tall, letting it weep down from there. We actually have one on camera that's exceptionally large at Seiryu Gardens, where we shoot with one that was staked to about 14 to 15 feet. So it's one you can play with a ton. Make it your own. Get as creative as you want with this one. But Ryusen had to be on our list. Often listed as Ryusei. You'll see it as Ryusei in Japan. Talon tells me we should always list it as Ryusei. I've seen people, listed as Millennium Green, which was like a misnomer for a while there. Ryusen or Ryusei are the correct names on that one. Great plant to be growing, though, and one that's always very popular.
Coming at number 21, we have Acer japonicum Vitifolium.
Vitifolium has that, dinner plate size foliage as well. This is one of the largest round Acer japonicum leaves. And you've heard me say this before, but give them some late day shade. That's the best way to get that foliage massive. It looks tropical. This looks like something you would see in a tropical zone. If you weren't familiar with Japanese maples, it might look like something a dinosaur would interact with. It's got that massive, almost like prehistoric looking shape to me. It looks just tropical. I mean, you could put these in an enclosure, and it's got that feel of like something maybe, a T-Rex might walk by to me.
It is very much like that. I find it comical that the common name for this is the grapevine maple. Like, I'm like, who thought of that name? But that leaf is a very large Acer japonicum leaf. And, calling it grapevine maple, sort of almost degrades how cool this plant actually is, because the leaves are so large, and on a tree that has such thick trunk to it, like you said, it gives that tropical feel. It makes it have that feel like you're in another world. And an amazing large green leaf Japanese maple with some excellent fall color.
Yeah, really fun one to be growing. Again, red tassel flowers on this one in the early spring really play off of those greens. Not uncommon to be bold red in the fall with oranges and yellows infused into that. So really showy for fall, as all Acer japonicums are. But I like it a lot for that midsummer. And you've got it in a shady spot, and it's that large foliage. It's got all of its, just full-size foliage on display. And it really stands out texture-wise from everything else in the garden. And people are really going to stop at this one and ask questions because it just looks so unique there in the landscape.
Every time I see those Latin names on those classic Japanese maples, I often wonder what was the original Japanese name on this. Have we ever seen another tree come to the nursery trade with a Japanese name that's similar? And I've never seen anything that looked like Vitifolium. And Vitifolium is so uniquely that large leaf with some really good fall color. It's just such an amazing tree.
So coming in here at number 20, we've got Acer sieboldianum Shiryu no Sume.
Guys, this is the claw of the dragon Japanese maple. The leaves look like claws on a dragon. It gives you a silver green leaf, so it's a very different shade of green. The textures are unreal because it's like a linerlobum selection of it's like a linerlobum mixed with like a Kamagata selection of a sieboldianum. I mean, that's what it looks like. It's just insane on the unique style of the foliage.
Yeah, this is another one that's going to be able to push zones sometimes into that zone 4. Very durable for cold tolerance. Shiryu no Sume really brings it. I mean, it's a perfect palette. Some of these, we're making this list based off what we like for green, but we're looking at different forms as well. And this one certainly stands out for form and uniqueness of foliage. So that texture is going to be completely different than almost everything else on this list. It really looks like a claw of a dragon. I think it's a cool name because it fits exactly what the leaf shape looks like. I've had incredible oranges to reds on this one. My favorite colors of this are like neon orange in the fall, but it can range into some red sometimes. Really gets to some more of those kind of, I wouldn't say blue-green because blue's really not the color, but sieboldianums really hit like a fuller, darker green shade to them. And so you get a little bit different color green than you're used to with palmatums.
So coming in at number 19, we've got Acer Palmatum Fountain of Youth. And this is one of our selections from our Area 51 collection at MrMaple as part of our Pendulous Treasures collection. And it is very unique in the fact that it has a hand-shaped style foliage on a Ryusen-like weeping Japanese maple.
It's the mythological fountain of youth. If you put this in your garden, you'll never get old. It's an amazing tree. Brings out the kid in me. So I like naming trees with goofy names like this. We actually picked the name on this one. And it's another one that gets about as big as you stake it. So just like with Ryusei, I like to stake it to about 5 to 6 feet and let it weep down from there. But you can play with the shapes completely. Now, this may be the best fall color of any of the Ryusei styles, going from some neon oranges to yellows all in the same plant. But really, it has an incredible green shade that's a light, pale green midsummer. It can actually get some salmon pink in it in the early spring. But if you look at this tree right now in July in our landscape, it's almost like a highlighter bright green. So it really shows out in the landscape. And I think it really brings something extra special to that Ryusei style Japanese maple.
And it's just as malleable as Ryusen. I mean, all those different ways we talked about growing Ryusen, you can do the same thing with Fountain of Youth with a uniquely different texture on the foliage. It's a really cool plant that is very unique and very different.
So Tim's been singing It's Not That Easy Being Green this whole podcast. At number 18, we've got Acer Palmatum Miss Piggy for you.
Y'all, Miss Piggy, it's pretty spectacular. It breaks the rules of Japanese maples. Maples typically have buds that are opposite. On Miss Piggy, you start to have opposite buds, and then they become a little bit misaligned. And then they start getting this really unique mutation where you see so many different buds coming off. It's very fastigiate growth, but it is just this fasciation that is very unusual and very different. And it'll twist and curl, and it'll sometimes look like a pig's tail. And that's where it gets the name of Miss Piggy.
Yeah, this was one named by Dick Vandermaat, good friend of ours in Holland. And the original plant kind of had that little pigtail right down there at the base of it. So it kind of can get these little weird corkscrew shapes going on. This one's so unique. I like looking at it out of leaf. I know it's a weird time to look at Japanese maples for some people, but you can almost get cactus-looking growth on this one. It's really unique. It's not uncommon for the buds to be kind of a light pink with that lime green bark of it. Just looks super unique. Now, Miss Piggy is exceptionally heat tolerant. This is one that would work great for bonsai, although full disclosure, it's going to make the craziest shape ever, so you're going to have to shape it all the time because buds come out everywhere. They don't come out only in that alternating bud style. Would look really cool though for the leaf shape. Kind of has a little bit of that Mikawa yatsubusa vibes to it because it has some of that density to it of Mikawa, that tight green. But it's not uncommon for it to throw foliage on wherever it wants.
It's unpredictable, and that's why I like it because it
just like Miss Piggy.
It's not boring. It grabs your attention, and it has something unique going on constantly with the way it twists, it curls, where the new growth buds are coming out. It was funny because you mentioned it looked like a cactus. We actually had someone at one of our open houses, and I brought them a Miss Piggy, and it was in leaf, and they said, "Oh, I was looking at your photos. I thought it was a cactus." But it is an amazing, amazing plant because it is so unique and so different with that green color. It really brings it.
All right, coming in here at number 17, we've got our first pine bark on the list.
I think it's the only pine bark we put on this list.
Okay, well, pine barks can have some exceptional greens as well. We've got Acer palmatum Arakawa.
Y'all, this is a nice, rich green, and the bark that gets really rough, gray below it, really shows off that green exceptionally well.
Yeah, excellent fall colors too. I mean, this one can be a showstopper in that fall garden with reds to almost oranges mixed in at the same time. I love Arakawa because it has more of that alligator buckle-like characteristic to the bark. So it sets it apart a little bit from Nishikigawa. Typically, Nishikigawa is going to look a little bit more, fissured bark and a little bit more what you think of a traditional pine bark tree, where Arakawa has a little bit more of that alligator back buckle to it.
It does. It has that really rough style to it, and it gives it a very old feel. And that's the reason why people for bonsai love Arakawa. In fact, in traditional Japanese gardening, Arakawa is a very popular tree because it gives the essence of a very old tree on a much younger plant. And so it can appear that it's much, much older. Arakawa doesn't take long to develop that bark either. And so it really can give you a unique feature out there in the landscape that looks like a really old tree in the landscape. So it's great for bonsai. It's great for fairy gardens because you can put it out there and make it look like this old ancient tree. It just feels like you're looking at a plant that's from the past. And it is so amazing because of that. Now, the green colors are awesome too. It gives you that summery feel. But again, the fall colors are underrated on Arakawa. Many of the pine bark selections have some outstanding fall color, and we focus so much on the bark. And then when the fall hits, you're like, wow, that color was spectacular.
Yeah, and you really can get those summery vibes on this older looking tree. So not only are you going to have that mature look from the bark, you're going to get that green that gives you that summery feel that's very popular in Japan, especially, in Japan. We read an article one time in Tsukiya Living, and I think they really helped encapsulate this a lot, is that those green Japanese maples really bring about those summer vibes. And it's kind of that summer feel that the greens have in the garden. Now, coming in here at number 16, we've got a MrMaple introduction, Acer palmatum Japanese lanterns.
We once had somebody say, wouldn't you just call it lanterns because it is a Japanese maple? And no, Japanese lanterns are so different than like lanterns in America. I mean, they're so different, and they've got that nice round structure. And what Japanese lanterns does is it each and every leaf curls downward, looking like a Japanese lantern.
Yeah, this one had to be on the list for texture and uniqueness. Not only do you have that chartreuse green spring foliage, you almost have these lantern-like shapes out of every leaf, especially as the tree matures. Now, fall colors can range from reds to oranges on this one, so you can get some lanterns that light up differently in the fall. Love this for its spring color, though. It's so unique. That bright chartreuse green really brings it. And the tree almost has a semi-pendulous nature. It's almost like the lanterns are weighing the tree down a little bit. It's a pretty cool look to it. A lot of times the branches will kind of droop a little bit, and it just looks like it's a tree ordained with lanterns.
I like it because it has a little bit more of an open structure.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, it looks like stringy, lanterns hanging off of each and every branch. And it is such a fun tree that takes you into the essence of Japan. And that's why it's called Japanese lanterns, is because it takes you to that other world, where if it was just called lanterns, that'd be kind of boring.
Well, it's kind of funny. People say, like, well, you wouldn't call it Japanese maples in Japan. I'm like, no, you would. We were on a Japanese TV show called Nippo Nikitai, and it's a great source of pride that they're Japanese maples. So people love that they're called Japanese maples. In fact, most people would be a little more insulted if you didn't give them the credit for saying this was from Japan. And so I think it's a thing of honor there to have the Japanese lanterns in there. I'm a huge fan of this tree. I think it's really interesting. And texture-wise, it's so unique in the landscape.
Coming up at number 15, we have Acer japonicum fairy lights.
Now, this is a Japanese maple from Australia. This was named by Yamina Rare Plant Nursery. It's an Acer japonicum, and it may be one of the smallest. I could think of a few that might give it a run for its money with Gossamer, but it may be one of the smallest Acer japonicums of them all, especially in that landscape setting. It has that lace leaf-like quality, very frilly look to it, but it's also very durable. I mean, this tree looks perfect for a fairy garden or a container garden because it has everything you need, from flowers to that soft green to lime green interest to amazing fall colors.
The foliage itself is a little more ornate than Green Cascade.
Mm-hmm.
And the structure is a little more rounded and a little more upright, which gives this tree a very unique feel. But its small, compact nature makes it excellent for fairy gardens, as the name Fairy Lights implies. But the fall color on this, it's a green Japanese maple for most of the year, but the fall color on this really does light up the small space it's in with really nice shades of yellows, oranges, and reds. And Fairy Lights is one of my favorite Acer japonicum selections. It's a really slow grower, though, and that means that a lot of our 1 gallons are often small. They're 2 or 3 year 1 gallons, but they're still really, really small because it is a slow grower.
Yeah, excellent plant. Chartreuse bright greens in the early spring. Again, being an Acer japonicum, it has those red tassel flowers that hang down from it. I feel like the weeping forms of Acer japonicum really show this off because you already have a pendulous nature, and then you have those red tassel flowers drooping down from there, and it really contrasts nicely with that bright, bright chartreuse green. It's not uncommon to have reds, yellows, and oranges all at the same time. Typically, mine looks like some Hulk Hogan mid-90s. It's got some neon, it's got that neon yellow coming through the red, and, a little Hulkamania there for you. It's a crazy tree for the color patterns. I'm a huge fan of what this one does in the landscape, though. And at being a smaller overall plant, too. It really shows out in a small area. Don't be afraid to put this one in a heavy shade location. It's not going to green up. You're still going to get those red tassel flowers and fall color. But it's going to look cool in the shade. It's not going to be something that is diminished for being in heavy shade.
That would be a great name for a Japanese maple. Acer japonicum Hulkamania.
What are you going to do? All right, guys. Coming in here at number 14, we've got Acer palmatum Nanyat. So I actually called an audible because I realized this one wasn't on here. So we had to get Nanyat on here. Introduction by the same guy who introduced Alpenwives, which was Bob Balter. He was a mentor to Talon Buchholz. We also got to go and visit with Bob and talk to him a lot about Japanese maples. And one of our favorite things to do when we visit people is to say, what's your favorite introduction? Well, Alpenweiss was his real famous tree that he introduced. And we said, what do you wish you'd introduced? Well, he said very quickly, let me show you over here in the corner of my nursery where I have this one tree that I should have done more with. It's called Nanyat. And say no more, Tim and I were hooked. We're running off to go see this. We're begging for signs, and we're getting it grafted.
Now, it's named after Nancy Baltzer, and he combined that with yatsubusa, which means smaller, compact dwarf. You often see that a commonly used term. You sometimes see that after Kiyohime, like Kiyohime yatsubusa or Mikawa yatsubusa. And he just combined those two names together and got Nanyat. Now, Nanyat is very unique in the fact that it has almost Shishigashira-like foliage with that green, unique texture that Shishigashira provides in the landscape. It has that darker, rich green, but it has some really nice bright green bark. So it's almost like you hybridized a Shishigashira with an Aoyagi, and it stays very tight, compact, dense, and it also has an electric bright yellow fall color. So this tree just brings it constantly.
Yeah, the stems can be almost soft yellow in the winter, but for most of the year, they're going to be a very lime green color as well, which just adds to this overall greenness of this tree. I mean, I think if we were talking for a total greenness factor, this one's pretty high on the list. It's got beautiful green foliage, beautiful green stemming, and it really just looks super nice. I think it's a great pairing with we put it in that Shishigashira family, but it really matches so well with so many Japanese maples that could be quite opposite in color. If you're putting this even near something that's a lace leaf like a Tamukiyama, not only is the green bark and the green foliage, but that fall color are going to contrast so well with any of your basic reds.
So coming at number 13, we have Acer palmatum Omureyama. This is a fun Japanese maple that gives you a nice shade of green out there, but it has a very unique habit. It gets much wider than it does tall, and it has a semi-pendulous to almost pendulous habit where it cascades laterally, and it has a very unique habit with that, with some really good shades of yellows to oranges in the fall.
I think your unique counter is over 50.
Unique. Different.
All right, guys. So I'm a big fan of Omureyama. If you hadn't heard me say that before. Beautiful tree. I think one of my favorite ones of these was at Highland Creek Nursery. We bought out Brian Upchurch's place in 2013. He had a gorgeous specimen of this. And it really looks its best when it's got, some height to it, but it's kind of spreading out. Like, think of this one almost shaped like a weeping cherry. So we say semi-pendulous. It's often like, what do they really mean by that? You get that standard trunk coming up, but then you get some width, and a lot of those branches, they're not only spreading out, they're kind of hanging down. So it gives it a very unique characteristic. I love the foliage on this one. It is a softer green than many of the other trees on this list as well, going to a very bold orange to yellow in the fall.
That wide characteristic, that's a moray.
All right, guys, coming in here at number 12, we've got Acer palmatum Salho. Now, this is one of my favorite dwarf Japanese maples. It is really unique for its not only small foliage, but rounded, dense canopy to it. Think of it as more of a globular shaped form of Kiyohime with even smaller foliage. I'm no bonsai master, but this is a perfect tree for bonsai. With that pinchback method, the foliage even gets smaller and smaller. This one's going to leaf out in the early spring with that bright purple border, but by midsummer, it's going to be a nice, cool green.
Guys, this is the Japanese maple that started our MrMaple YouTube show. It's our very first Japanese maple on our YouTube show. And if you want to see like a Tim Nichols from he was in college. That's me. When I was like super young, I was a lot skinnier back then. And you see me talking about the ultimate bonsai Japanese maple, Acer palmatum Salho. And it's because this tree, it gets a thick caliper quickly. It has small foliage. And it's a vigorous dwarf, which seems like an oxymoron. I mean, you look at Japanese maples and the dwarfs, are often tight and compact. This thing shoots out, then denses up. And so it's the excellent tree for a lot of people beginning with bonsai.
We had our open house recently, and I was shooting a top 5 with Brandon, and he said, I've been watching your channel since I was 13 in middle school. And I'm like, oh, man, we've been doing this that long. And Salho was our first video. I think I come right there that same day and did a Ryusen. We listed those a few weeks apart. So we've been doing this for a minute. Salho really is one of our favorite trees. Probably the reason I didn't keep doing a custom liner business. I kept telling people like, hey, you need to grow Salho. And they said, no, I want Bloodgood and Crimson Queen. I said, no, you really need to try out Salho. And we realized that we were more retail oriented, that we like to sell the rare and unusual stuff. Salho is quite that. It really stands out. It makes, I think, one of the quintessential container plants. We talk about it for bonsai, but you don't have to be a bonsai expert just to put this one in a big pot. Let it do its thing. It is spectacular, whether it's in the ground or in the container. That purple border really does stand out nicely. It's almost like a yellowish eye in the early spring. But by midsummer, when this thing's slowing down a little bit on the new growth, you get some really nice shades of green. And really shows out with that some of the smallest foliage you'll see of any Japanese maple ever.
I don't know of many Japanese maples that could have a smaller foliage than what Salho provides in the garden. Talking about the first video, too, to tell you how long ago it was, if you watch it, it says, hey, and welcome to Mr. Video. Like, videotapes were a thing back then. That's how long it's been since we've been running our YouTube show, the Mr. Maple Show. Coming in at number 11, we've got Acer palmatum Hupp's dwarf.
Now, this was found by Barbara Hupp, who recently wrote a review of this one on our website. I think she liked it. She's a fan. She introduced this one. They owned a Christmas tree farm, and they found this one and got signs to Vare trees. Such an exceptional looking tree. I think Hupp's dwarf is very unique for me. And me and Brian were kind of talking about this. We had some really nice size ones we were selling at open house. And we were kind of going back and forth on whether we considered it more like Mikawa yatsubusa or more like Shishigashira. And I could be made to believe to put that in either camp there. I mean, it's kind of got more Mikawa vibes for me, but it certainly has a lot of the things I like about Kuranajishi for the leaf size and some of the things I like about Shishigashira. So very unique and also a very unique shade of green. This one's going to be more of a dark evergreen color in the landscape. So it stands out if you put this in your Mikawa garden. It's going to stand out a lot from Mikawa yatsubusa.
To me, if it had another name, it could be like Mikawa X Goshiki Koto-hime, because it has that tightly layering habit. It has that larger foliage. It has some of the color patterns that like Goshiki Koto-hime may have, where it has a little bit of that pinkish new growth to it that then fades to that green color. But it has a unique shade of green that can almost be described as a blue-green at times, which is very unique. It can be a dark green to get a blue-green color that seems a little bit crazy for some Japanese maples.
I'll hop on my soapbox for a second, too. This one is Hupp's, Hupps. You'll sometimes see it confused with Hubs because of Hub's Red Willow. We can go to Red Maple Nurseries with Dick Wolf's catalog and look that the original Hubs is Hubs, Hubbs. Easy to confuse with Hupps. Jason Hupp, good friend of ours, and Barbara Hupp, who found this. We always want to give the right people credit. So Hupp's Dwarft there, exceptional tree. And I think if you're growing Mikawa family and you like that kind of look to it, or if you're just a fan of Shishigashira, it's a must-have. It really fits in so well with those.
Yeah, it's really weird to say, where do you put this? It's that in-between tree that is very unique and very different. Click that unique button. But it is. It stands out from other Japanese maples, and that's how I categorize Japanese maples in my head. How does this tree stand out? How is this tree different? And if it's not different, do we need another one? Well, it is truly unique and special when it comes to Japanese maples because it doesn't really fit in any categories.
All right, guys, coming in here at number 10, we've got a Mr. Maple introduction. Now, this was the only tree. You could probably give Dad credit for Blackbeard's Gold. He did keep the tree. But either Blackbeard's Gold or Jade Dragon would probably be the only two that Dad was growing here before us. Now, we put names on both these for him, but Jade Dragon is a selection made here at our nursery. My dad grafted this tree in around 92 for a friend of his named Bob Jackman. Bob found it here locally as a seedling in Hendersonville, North Carolina. The original tree is still there in my parents' landscape, and it's only at about 3 to 4 feet tall. So it is a very compact form with this dense, kind of a blue-green habit as well. Kind of has jade, kind of adequately describes the color on this one. It's a very jade green. And Jade Dragons are kind of fun. They're these small things that people often trade around for good luck. And it made good sense for us. These small Jade Dragons kind of represented this tree.
Now, Jade Dragon was found as a chance seedling, according to Robert Jackman, as a chance seedling from Shishigashira, which is pretty unique that could have possibly been a Shishigashira seedling. But it is very tight, compact, dense, fits in really small spaces. It's also a tree that makes a great container plant, and it has more of that jade color, and that's where we got that name of the Jade Dragon. And we figured a lot of times, too, that, Jade Dragons are things that you give to people on momentous occasions. And so if you're looking to give someone a gift, a Japanese maple is a great tree to do that with.
Awesome one there at number 10. Now, coming in here at number 9, we've got a completely different aesthetic, but still wearing that shade of green. We've got Acer palmatum Koto-no-ito.
Guys, this is the Japanese harpstring Japanese maple. It has a very open, airy feel in the garden. It has leaves that just dangle. It's very unique in the fact that it has your linear style foliage, but it has string-like foliage in there as well. It's often more of that chartreuse green to more of that light green, and so it gives you a unique feel in the garden, but also just a unique color and aesthetic.
So I love Koto-no-ito. When you look at linear they kind of give you that perfect Asian gardening feel to them for me. You already think of bamboo and some of these textures that you see in linear associated with Asian gardening. And Koto-no-ito really brings that airy, open, peaceful, relaxing kind of vibe to it. Definitely, if you're sitting around in a bad mood and you're looking at birds at a mature Koto-no-ito and just the gracefulness of this tree, it's hard to be in a bad mood. It's a very relaxing style of Japanese maple. I feel like when I see this one, I almost hear like wind chimes. It's got that kind of relaxing aesthetic to it. Really brings, everything you like about bamboo, but with fall color and everything great about a Japanese maple. Not going to be invasive roots. You're still going to have that texture that you want in the garden of that bamboo style. You're going to get great fall color, being more of a golden yellow to even a little bit of orange in it sometimes. But really bright shades of lime green to chartreuse green throughout the spring and summer really make this one an excellent addition to the garden for texture and color.
You don't get many Japanese maples that are upright in that mid-sized stature that have that fine texture, and that open, airy feel. And that's what Koto-no-ito can provide. Now, our number 8 is very different. Our number 8 is Rikuzen shidare, and it has that heavily cascading habit, but it has very large foliage, which makes this tree really stand out from many other Japanese maples.
Yeah, this one's really special because it does have that Ryusen or Ryusei style weeping pendulous nature to it, but it has a leaf shape that's more akin to something like Hogyoku or Osakazuki. It has that large Amoenum style leaf shape. Really cool one. Now, this one has a unique story behind it as well. You've probably heard us talk about this, but a friend of ours in Japan went to a temple and he asked for cuttings of Rikuzen shidare, and they said no. Well, our friend said, I'm getting it anyway. So he got some cuttings of Rikuzen shidare, and unfortunately, the temple in that area were lost during the tsunami. So the original tree did get washed away during the tsunami or was underwater too long. It didn't make it through that tragedy. And one of the beautiful things about this, though, is that our friend did go and give them what would be akin to like a 10-gallon Rikuzen shidare. And he said, I did get this, and I wanted to return this to this temple so that they still can have that characteristic here again. So kind of a cool, happy ending to that one. And so always share your plants with grafters like Tim and I, because we can get you back those traits when you lose them.
And he did tell them this is the importance of sharing.
Right.
Which I think is important too.
Rikuzen has those large green leaves, though. I mean, think about a weeping green star with larger foliage. It's really unique because that foliage is massive. I mean, I've had it get 3 to 4 inches wide. This may be the first one in that Ryusen style weeping habit that isn't in that same lineage at all. Like this one seems completely outside the Nakakamado Weeping kind of parentage.
It is, and it is unique because it has the large foliage. It's unique because it has that yellow fall color. And from what we know about making maple tempura, if you're wanting to make maple tempura, you need something that's got the yellow fall color. And Rikuzen shidare is an excellent one that you could grow in a container on your porch. And whenever it goes to fall color, collect those leaves and make your maple tempura. So an awesome tree all the way around.
All right, coming in here at number 7. We'll see if you think this one's unique too. Number 7, we've got Acer japonicum, Mai kujaku.
And guys, this is Mai kujaku. Mai means dancing and kujaku means peacock. Originally, years ago, people often called it Meiku and Jaku because they knew of a Meiku shark. And so they often tried to call it Meiku and then Jaku. But it really is Mai kujaku. It's also known as Vitifolium in the nursery trade.
A lot of people come in and say, I want that dancing peacock, and we know exactly what they're looking for as well.
I want a fern leaf Japanese maple.
Right.
Same thing, the Mai kujaku. And this is a Acer japonicum selection with heavily divided foliage. And the foliage looks like a peacock displaying its feathers. And that's where it gets its name. And the fall color's electric, but it really is a really nice tree for the landscape with green foliage, but more divided foliage, very ornamental, ornate leaf.
Yeah, you turn this one sideways, especially when it's hitting fall color, and those fans can be reminiscent of kind of a peacock, in full display there. It's not uncommon to have reds, yellows, and oranges all at the same time. Again, being an Acer japonicum, those red tassel flowers are really nice on this one, and they really accentuate that lime green foliage. Now, this one does leaf out in the early spring, a really nice lime green shade, kind of fading to more of a Kelly green midsummer. Give your Acer japonicum some shade in your hotter zones, especially like your zone 8 and zone 9. You're going to get bigger foliage, but you're also just going to get prettier fall color if you keep those leaves nice and healthy from that full, kind of midsummer sun. Beautiful tree to be growing, and one of our most heavily sought after Acer japonicums. I think it might be our most popular Acer japonicum here at Mr. Maple. It always sells out when we have it in stock because it's so, out there. It kind of gives you a little bit of what you're looking for that aesthetic for children. It's easy for kids to want to go look at a peacock in the garden, and it's relatable because of that, but it also has definitely that Japanese gardening quality to it that kind of draws you into Japanese maples.
Mai kujaku is one of those plants that has always been a favorite of ours, and because of that, it's always been one that sells out really quickly. I find it entertaining when other nurseries tell me that they can't sell Mai kujaku. I'm like, well, trade me for some blood goods because I can sell the hound out of some Mai kujaku. It is such a special tree. Matt and I love it so much that we only keep 2 plants of each variety of Japanese maples. But Mai kujaku, we find often we plant 2 in every garden. So we plant 2 at Matt's house. We plant two at our display gardens. I mean, we love Mei kujaku. And it is a plant that we've been growing for a long time here at Mr. Maple. It's one of Dad's first sets of Japanese maples, probably his first 20 Japanese maples he was growing here at Mr. Maple. And it is a tree that everyone needs. I mean, the fall color is electric. The tassel flowers are amazing in the spring, but that green, that tropical feel that it provides out there in the landscape is just outstanding.
All right, y'all, coming in here at number 6, we've got Acer palmatum dissectum Seiryu. Now, Seiryu is very unique in that it is an upright that has a lace leaf characteristic to it. So this one is a lace leaf. Most times the lace leaves are going to be more pendulous, small, cascading umbrella shapes. This one makes a very tall, very vigorous growing tree form.
Now, this is a brighter green Japanese maple. It gives a soft texture because it does have a lace leaf to it, even though it is a larger tree. But the unique thing about this tree is that if you grow this tree in a more shaded situation, it does get some blue or green colors to it. And older trees, older specimens, you can actually go into where the tree shades itself out and see some of this bluish green color. The name Seiryu translates as blue-green dragons. And that's where this tree gets that name, is from that blue-green color. The fall color is outstanding, but the most amazing feature of Seiryu to me is its durability and heat tolerance. This is a plant that anybody can grow. You give it space, and this is a tree that turns into a large tree, and it is possibly one of the most heat-tolerant Japanese maples that we grow here at Mr. Maple.
I'm always impressed by its speed of growth. I mean, this one's going to put on a foot to most of the time, 1.5 feet of growth a year. So this provides you shade for smaller, less durable maples. It gives you that aesthetic of a lace leaf, even in a larger size. So it has an open, airy, graceful approach. You're going to have a large tree with lace leaf foliage blowing around, and it just kind of has that relaxing element to it as well. Seiryu is very easy to do. I mean, this one, anybody can grow this one. You get it out, it's going to handle sun or shade. You're going to have some interesting shades of green, whether it's that chartreuse in full sun or that blue-green in shade. It's going to go to a bold red in the fall, giving you a lot of contrast with those greens as well. And it really just provides, an easy tree to grow that, especially if people are looking for a Japanese maple that's not small, this is the one for you. Oftentimes people will say, well, I want a Japanese maple, but there's no way I'm going to see it be any bigger. Seiryu is going to fill out exceptionally fast. You're going to get this one in your landscape. Don't be afraid to buy it in a 1. I mean, you get this one in a 1 gallon, it's going to be, over 10 foot in the next 5 to 10 years. Like, it gets out there.
It does. It's very vigorous and keeps growing fairly fast. And it can handle the heat, which is super impressive for a lace leaf Japanese maple. I mean, it's an amazing tree that many people need to be growing.
All right, we're breaking the top 5 down here for you. If you're watching this on YouTube, let us know in the comment section your top 5 green Japanese maples. Bet some of you have some pretty good guess what's at number 1. You might be shocked by a few of these. These are some of our favorites. The top 5 green Japanese maples coming your way. Starting at number 5, Waterfall. Now, I've always considered Waterfall and Veritas extremely similar. I got a good chuckle when I was reading a letter out of the Oregon State Archives the other day from J.D. Vertrees. It was a letter he had sent to D.M. Van Gelderen in 78, and he said, I see no distinguishable difference between Waterfall and Veritas. I was like, right on. I've been trying to tell people that for a while, so Vertrees agrees. Waterfall, though, and Veritas are classic green weeping lace leaves that I think provide, a much-needed contrast to all the red we have going on in the Japanese maple world. Typically, Waterfall or Veritas are typically someone's second tree. Someone may buy a lace leaf Crimson Queen or a Naba Shidare or a Tomukiyama, and they're looking for something to contrast that, and Waterfall is going to slide into that spot perfectly.
So many of the Japanese maples coming from Japan got the term Veritas, and it was basically meaning that they were a green Japanese maple. And there was a green Japanese maple, which would have been considered a Veritas, growing in New Jersey at a state park at a waterfall. And it got the name Waterfall. And so that's really how Waterfall came to be. It is probably one of the most commonly asked for Japanese maples now.
We've had years where it was our top seller.
Yeah, and a lot of classic nurserymen will tell me, they'll say, as this tree ages, Waterfall has a little more hooking than Veritas. And then you go look at the old Veritas, and they also has the same hooking. So it really has to do with maturity of the plants and comparing plants side by side. And that's where I think a lot of people don't take the time to compare older, mature specimens before they say something's different from something else. But Waterfall is an excellent tree out in the landscape and garden. It has a nice arching umbrella-like habit that has that waterfall type effect. And with the green lace leaves, it's a classic green Japanese maple that's excellent for Japanese gardening, excellent for any gardening. And I often recommend putting this tree, in those darker spots to brighten it up. If you've got a dark background behind it, this tree really shows off. Often red lace leaves can get lost next to a red background or a brown background, while putting a green will really show off the plant. So keep that in mind. These green Japanese maples, especially Waterfall, is that nice cascading Japanese maple that has some really nice arching habits.
Yeah, it definitely gives you that summery feel. This one's going to be very durable in sun up to zone 8. It's going to work zones 5 through 9, but it's exceptionally durable. I know when we were in Columbia, South Carolina, more people were after Waterfall than any other Japanese maple we do. We would do a lot of trade shows down there back in the day, and we would sell at a Waterfall first before the Reds, which really shocked us because people were looking for that green accompaniment to a tree they already have in their landscape. And Waterfall's durable, but also has that chartreuse to lime green color in that early spring. Really beautiful. Now, the fall color can range from yellows to oranges. I've had this one be some electric shades of orange in the fall. Couldn't have a top 50 green Japanese maples without Waterfall on the list.
Guys, coming in at number 4, we got the Mac Daddy. We got Acer, palmatum dissectum, Germaine's Gyration.
This one's funky. I love it. It gets those contorted growth going on in there. Another one like Seiryu that gets out there quickly. So if you're looking for a Japanese maple that gets big, I always let people know you need space for Germaine's Gyration. This isn't the tree for the small little corner with no room. Typically, Germaine's Gyration wants to be 10 foot tall by 10 foot wide in 10 years. So you can have that Biltmore house. You can have that Longwood Gardens type aesthetic. Even in a shorter time frame, it'll look like a massive older tree. And Germaine's is one that has that green color from the bright chartreuse foliage in the early spring to a Kelly green in the summer. And it really looks exceptional because it has a much larger leaf than things like Waterfall too. So you get a bigger palette for that green.
It really does. I fell in love with this plant when we went to go visit Bill Taylor. And Bill Taylor in Spartanburg, South Carolina, has a huge specimen.
I think it was planted in 92, he told me.
Yeah, huge specimen of Germaine's Gyration. And, he did some light pruning to accentuate the twist and contorting habit, but you could really see the structure and the twist and contorting habit of Germaine's Gyration. And it was just one of these plants that I just was enthralled by. And I was like, I want that. And that's what Germaine's Gyration can do, is you can get a Germaine's Gyration, put it in your landscape, and have a specimen really quickly with a very unique habit, with that twist and contorting that gives it that bonsai-like aesthetic, but in a large tree in the landscape. And it's just an amazing tree. I think someone offered him $10,000 or $20,000 for the plant.
It was an absorbent amount of money.
And he said, I'd rather you take a bulldozer through my front porch because this is a part of my home.
It's funny because I've always thought so fondly of that tree, and now the one in my mom's garden is starting to get big enough that people get that kind of feeling when they see it. So the Germaine's has only been there in my parents' garden less than 10 years, and it's a massive specimen. I'm planting it in a small 5-gallon, and it is huge now. And I get so many comments from it when we have garden tours. People have the same kind of, visceral reaction to the size of this lace leaf and how contorted the branching are. And that one's not been pruned at all. It gets zero shaping, but it still has that high arching, what you think of this older Japanese garden, really gives you that age style to it.
One thing I've learned about Germaine's Gyration, the more and more I love this plant, the more it contorts, is you want to stake it up to, 2 or 3 feet if you can. Because if you can get this tree starting out to twist and contort at a higher point, you can look up into that branching more easily. And so that's just a fun way to grow Germaine's Gyration because of that. But Germaine's Gyration appears to be fairly heat tolerant for us. It appears to be fairly fast growing. And it does have a pretty decent fall color of some really nice shades of yellows to oranges. So, all the way around, this is an amazing tree, but give it some space because it does get out there quickly.
So, number 3 on our list, another tree that I have kind of that emotional connection to, we've got Acer palmatum Nakakamado Weeping. Now, Tim and I got to go and see a 400-year-old version of this in Japan. I often joke with folks that if you plant this tree in 400 years, it can look exactly like this. But it's always a reminder that those trees continue to grow and they'll outlive us all.
Now, Nakakamado Weeping is a very old Japanese maple, and it resides at a temple in the Fukushima prefecture of Japan. It's considered the national treasure of Japan. It is one of the oldest recorded cultivar specimens with a name on it in Japan. And it has that palmate style leaf, like I guess you'd say like Ryusen, very similar to that. But it has these arching hooked habits that are very unique and special for this tree. And it is such an old specimen. It has stakes that are over 200 years old that are dated, wooden stakes that are over 200 years old, holding up some of the branches. I mean, it's just insane, the history behind Nakakamado Weeping. And it is a tree that is highly revered. It's sitting right beside of a temple. And Matt and I got to go visit it. We were visiting Nakata-san while we were on Nippon Ikita, and we were reading the very back of his brochure, talking about how close he was. He's within an hour's drive of the national treasure of Japan. And Matt and I looked at each other, and we said, we need to get a rental car.
Right.
And they wouldn't let us get a rental car because they were filming the TV show, even though it was a day off. And
they were afraid we'd get lost. They
Nakata-
already got a lot of money in us being there. They didn't want us. These two crazy guys are going to run off into the woods looking for maples, and we're not going to find them anymore. So they were like, no, we need to send somebody with them. So they told our interpreter, don't lose these guys.
And Nakata-san was very gracious and drove us an hour and a half over to go see Nakakamado Weeping. Took us to this temple, and it was in perfect fall color. And we're talking, really nice shades of oranges to reds with these amazing arching habits. And it just has that emotional response now because of that one time we got to go visit the Nakakamado Weeping, the national treasure of Japan. And this is such a cool Japanese maple.
Yeah, it's one of those trees. If you ask me what my individual favorite Japanese maple is on the planet, it's probably that one. It's amazing. At first we'd ask an interpreter who wasn't as horticulturally minded about this tree, and they had interpreted from another person that it may be the same as Jiro Shidare. So we had that as a misnomer early. We went back with another person who understood horticulture terms a little bit better than our first interpreter, and they said, no, Jiro Shidare comes from this. So we have that lineage of likely Jiro Shidare being a seedling from Nakakamado Weeping, and then as many people know, Ryusen, and many other trees come from that lineage as well, that those could be seedlings from Jiro Shidare. So a cool lineage there that is, it goes all the way from Nakakamado Weeping down to Dragon Master now, and who knows what the next generations will look like from this tree. Very cool green Japanese maple that has to be on our list and really shows out in that green style, that contorted habit to it, and that very unique overall aesthetic.
Coming at number 2, guys, we've got a classic Japanese maple. We've got Acer palmatum Shishigashira, the lion's head Japanese maple.
Make sure to go check out our video we did at Don Schmidt Nursery. We stand in front of 2 80-year-old Shishigashiras. Most of the Shishigashiras in the United States are grafted from those. Really cool plant. The only time I've ever seen one bigger was at Arboretum Trompenberg. There was one there that was probably close to 40 feet, and it was just really cool to see. Again, trees continue to grow beyond our lifetime many times, and that one was one planted in the 1800s. Amazing tree. Shishigashira, often referred to as the lion's head. A little bit of a misnomer there. It's a specific line. A lot of these older cultivars have specific Japanese poetry that go with them. So we have the Shishigashira, the Ojishi, and the Mujishi, the lion cub. The Shishigashira is actually the female lion. We think of it as the lion's mane, but it's actually the female lion in that story. Beautiful tree. And this one has to be on any green list, and it has to be high on any green list because it has that darker evergreen color. It really stands out from everything else on this list, color pattern wise, because of that aesthetic. It really brings a darker vibe to the garden. Very popular for bonsai. I mean, I had a friend who grew Shishigashira and Shishigashira seedlings for over 50 years for bonsai, and they were so unique. I mean, they all had that. He only picked the ones that had that Shishigashira-like characteristic, but they made perfect bonsai for that very reason. That dark color to amazing oranges, reds, and yellows in the fall really makes Shishigashira stand out. And it's one of those plants that people might not think is a Japanese maple if they're new to it.
Like Okushimo further down the list, I think of Shishigashira, I think of the texture. I mean, it has that curled foliage, that dark green color like you were talking about. And that just draws your eye and lets you see more shades of green. I mean, you plant a Shishigashira out there with that darker color, and then you throw other greens out there, you start to see more shades of green too. And that is the name of the game, is this diversity. And the diversity and the texture that Shishigashira provides is amazing. Like you said, it's great for bonsai, but it's great just out there in the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is another one we're accused of planting too many of, and for good reason. We love this plant. It's easy to grow. It's bulletproof. It's easy for many people to grow, even in high heat areas, with very little care, as long as you've got good drainage.
To be clear, don't shoot it.
That just means it's very hardy, guys. But Shishigashira is an easy plant for many people to grow.
All right, coming in at number 1, I'm sure people can guess what this is. What do we got at 1, Tim?
Mikawa yatsubusa.
I mean, I think all the other trees are getting jealous at this point. We've done a lot of lists where Mikawa ends up at number 1. We've done a lot of top 5s with folks where Mikawa ends up at number 1. I mean, everybody's getting a little jealous of the Mikawa yatsubusa at this point. It gets on our list for good reasons. It's the most popular green Japanese maple that we do. It's typically our top selling tree of the year. And it's everybody has that emotional reaction to Mikawa yatsubusa, whether they're new to maples or whether they're a sophisticated Japanese maple collector who's been doing this for 20 plus years. There's always kind of this reverence for Mikawa. It's like, yeah, that one.
It's fun. It's exciting. It has a tightly layering habit that's creature-like. It gives you a reaction like a Muppet. I mean, we've described this plant so many times, but the truth is that we love it. And there's reasons we love it. And the reasons we love it is it's easy to grow, but it is just a fun tree. I mean, you look at this tightly layering habit and you're just entranced by it. And it just wants you to plant it in your garden. Right. You're like, if this was a puppy and you're walking into an adopted shelter, this one's got its eyes at you and you're like, okay, you're coming home with me.
Everybody sees this one, has that kind of reaction to it. It's popular for so many good reasons. In that early spring garden, it's a bright chartreuse green. Oftentimes, some of the petioles will even have that red hue to them that when they're leafing out, so you get a little bit of contrast with the petioles, even to the chartreuse green of Mikawa. As it puts on new growth, it'll even contrast with itself. So it's not uncommon to have multiple shades of green in this tree, from a darker, older green to the newer green on the new growth. Oranges to yellows to reds in the fall, typically bright orange to bright red is kind of the aesthetic in the fall on this one. And I mentioned, in earlier part of the podcast, people come up to us and they say, hey, I want a bonsai tree. And I often tell them, well, a lot of different Japanese maples can be grown in a bonsai aesthetic. You don't have to be an expert at bonsai to make Shishigashira or Mikawa yatsubusa look amazing as a bonsai. And Mikawa already looks like a bonsai. So you put this one in a big container, you've got that flattened layer look with that tight shingling, and it just has that aesthetic of Asian gardening. It has what you're looking for. It has that exotic feel to it right out the gate.
And it's green, and when people are introduced to it, even if they were coming for a red, they often decide, I also want a Mikawa yatsubusa.
Right. If you think green Japanese maples are boring, check out Mikawa yatsubusa. Your mind's going to change.
I think that is our plant that helps get other people introduced into all these other Japanese maples, because you begin to see how amazing each and every Japanese maple can be when you see Mikawa yatsubusa. And it's not what many people were starting to look for. They were starting to look for a red upright or a red weeping Japanese maple. And then they see Mikawa yatsubusa and they say, there's a whole nother world out there that I didn't know. I better subscribe to the Mr. Maple Show.
All right, guys. So you've made it through the top 50 green Japanese maples. You're the plant geekiest of plant geeky, and we appreciate you more than you know. We really appreciate you sticking around for this. And if you've already made it to the end of the video, you love Japanese maples, you want to subscribe to us on YouTube and on all major podcast platforms. Make sure to rate us 5 stars. That'll help other people find this plant geeky content that we love to turn out.
And if you really appreciate us, we'd really appreciate it if you shopped with us on MrMaple.com.
That helps also. We appreciate that. Guys, take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.